So TJ, I wanted to ask you about about your experience with all of those sort of early groups as you were coming up, uh, knowing you sort of talked about earlier everything that's important to you now as an educator. Was there anybody that was really influential in forming those values early on for you?
This might be the wrong answer, but not really. Not really. I can't think of like I had a lot of great instructors, a lot of great instructors. Um, Honestly, the if there's one person that really sticks to my, it's a soccer coach I had. It was this guy named Jose Vivanco. Um, and he just asked, we were, started playing on his team when I was like 8, and I played there until I was, I don't know, 13, 14. We were probably the, I don't know, third, fourth best team in the state. Um, but he just drilled it into us young, right? Like, hey, if you're part of this, you're gonna work your ass off and we're gonna earn everything that we're gonna get, right? And he also had us play in, I don't know if you guys are soccer guys, he had us play in a very specific way. Um, and the way we played was very disciplined. We passed the ball a certain way. Like we went to meetings before the year. We would go to the richest person on the team's house, right? Whoever that was that year. We would go to the nicest basement we got. We'd have a party, but before the party, we'd have like a business, like almost like a film study, right, with this guy, where we'd like watch stuff. He'd have a presentation on like the actual players, like watching, I don't know, Thierry Henry and the French team and doing all this, and he would like just really coach us up super hard before the season on here's the expectations, here's our priorities this year, here's how we're going to execute it. So like if there's one guy, I guess early that really drove that into me, it would have been him. And my dad he was the assistant coach and he was always keeping me accountable, right? Like at home, we would have to work on juggling, which is, just bouncing this ball off your foot a bunch. And Jose would be like, hey, you guys got to go home. You got to juggle, you know, 10 minutes a day, works on your touch, developing skills. Don't stop until you can get 30 in a row. And my dad would literally sit there and just watch me do it. And I would fail. I'd get to 14 and then fall. I'd get to 16 and he would, tough luck, kid, figure it out, right? So I think that started early. To me, like there's discipline in band, but I can't think of like one person that really drove that home more than anyone else. I think, yeah, it would have been Jose for sure.
And I really like that because I say it a bunch. Like I'm a big fan of uh, when we're looking for how to do this thing, this in the marching activity. I love corroboration from the outside. So I love that you as a young person just figuring trying to navigate your way through this really sparked to, hey, there's something here in the way this guy is preparing us and training us that really makes sense to you, right? And even if you were just receiving it and being trained as a young person, like the idea that you can take that and maybe on your own, you're bringing that in terms of your own personal preparation to these other groups, and then maybe there's some of that DNA in you as a teacher as well early on when you're like, well, how am I going to do this? You know?
There was another guy who taught me at Pariah. There was two people. There was my buddy Zach's dad, Tim, and there was this other guy named Ryan Bybee. And Ryan used to be a band director in Atlanta, and he was a brass caption head briefly at Phantom Regiment. Um, but he was like our visual guy, and he was actually the first guy to ever hire me as a tech, funnily enough. But they did one thing I learned from them was like they really treated you like people, right? Like even though you're a kid, like sometimes in sports, like you were just, get up, play, fucking do your job, right? Like, okay, go home, I'll see you next week. There wasn't like as much maybe interpersonal connection. And maybe it's because I was one of the better performers. I don't know. I didn't grow up with a lot of money, right? They found ways to make it work for me, right? And found ways to support me and one time I had a lung collapse, right? And I had to go to the ER after rehearsal, and like 3 days later, who shows up to just check on me? It was Ryan Bybee, right? Just to like see, what's going on. And to me, like I think that's important. I think sometimes I don't know if these day and age, like we're afraid of personal connections with the kids. you know, but I feel like, what's important at Quest, and this might be something that's kind of bled through, is we treat them like humans, right? We talk about their weeks. We try to, learn what they're going through and try to support them, right? And sometimes the answer is, I don't know, you got to figure it out, right? But a lot of times, just a little bit of empathy, kind of understanding what's going on. I probably took that from them too. Um, yeah, and Tim is still, he's Zach's father, and he still comes in and checks in and watches us, and he'll give us an opinion or two because he ran a group forever. Uh, and he's just a really supportive guy. So I that's something I probably took away as well.
We know that you marched 2012 Blue Coats. Did you do any drum corps before that?
No, I was a one and done, man. I think I could have done 2 years tops, just because after that, it's such a tough life out there. I don't know if I'm built for like these 4, 5, 6 year vets. Like, I ain't built like that. But I always wanted when I was early and young. Again, I went through phases, right? I love the Blue Devils, and I love the Cadets, and then I became like a Rennick just fanboy, right? So I developed like my version of what I thought Rennick drumming was, which was like just a lot of arm, I guess, because they didn't look like they turned his wrist as much. So like all the balance stuff and like the blends and the softness, that's not what I took away from watching videos as a kid. I just took this away, right? So I developed my own little Rennick thing, and I almost marched Boston. In 2011, there was a guy named Ellis Hampton who was kind of Rennick's number two for a while. He got the caption head gig at Boston, and I went down there and marched, or tried to march. I auditioned. This was after Terminus. Did a video, went down there. They like contracted a few UNT guys, and then said, "Hey, like come back next camp and you'll get a contract. Like you're in a good spot." And I said, "Okay." But I never came back. Boston at that time, it felt too like bando to me, right? Like I'm a sports guy. I like drumming, and then I like not drumming. I like talking about stuff that's not band, right? I want to be able to talk to my colleagues about, sports and chicks and all this stuff at the time, right? There was just a moment. I remember there was a moment we were in the food line at an audition camp at Boston, and like no one was talking. They were just like all like tight, like they were like cadets walking to the bathrooms in the lot, right? And I was like, man, I'm not sure this is the place for me. So like culturally at the time, it just didn't fit. And then I went to Coates the next year after marching Mystique, and I remember it was the first audition camp or the callback camp rather, and it was awesome. We got done with a block, we went to lunch, and then all the snare dudes were just there talking about like sports, and I was like, oh baby, this is my spot. So yeah, so I almost did, but no, I just did 1 year. Blue coats, rook out, easy peasy.
What a year too.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. Do you ever look back and think like, look at all the instructors that have come out of that 2012 line?
It's cool. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to look at all the success they've had.
What from that particular line do you think's led to that success after drum corps or after marching as instructors?
Yeah. Well, Mike Jackson is one of the best teachers I've had. Uh, and he's so smart, and you learn a lot about treatment of members from him. Like he obviously has a high standard of execution, but I think if you asked him like what's the thing he cares about, is he cares about and I don't want to speak for him, but I think he cares about the member having a fulfilling experience, right? So he was a wizard from that standpoint. But in the snare line specifically, I think the best guy in the entire activity, is Eric Shriver. He is by far the best teacher I've ever had. And when you look particularly from the snare line, right? Like I was an end snare guy, Taha's an end snare guy. We're running reasonably or helping run reasonably successful WGI lines. You got Joe Woody, Tom, they're teaching Rhythm X, right? So I think Shriver was just an excellent, excellent, excellent teacher. But same thing on the bass line, the quad line, right? I mean, they're all teaching places. So I think there was I don't know if this is why, but there was just such a good culture there, and it was spearheaded by Tom Gasparini, right? Like there's a lot of times where you go to a group and there's like a weird hierarchy, right? Where like here's the leaders, I'm just a plebeian here. They run the show, I'm whatever. But there we treat each other like peers, like true like brothers, right? And it was so connected throughout the entire place. I don't know if that just I don't know if that just made us love the activity more, right? Than maybe people from other groups in other years. Maybe they age out and they don't feel the connection like we did. I don't know, but there was something about that line, and the way Tom led us, and the way he included everyone and made everyone feel important, right? Like Taha would run pad sectionals, the end snare drummer. We'd get on the bus. Tom would call the chunk, we'd play a rep, and then the end snare drummer would call ticks and be like, "Hey, here's the problem we had, and here's how we fix it." Right? There was no egos. It was just 20, whatever, how many people we had, 18 people, just working their ass off to be as good as possible. Right? So I don't know. I don't know if there's other lines where like you can just look down and be like, okay, that guy writes the body at Mystique. Okay, that guy teaches Rhythm X. Okay, that guy runs that group. That I don't know if there's a lot like that, but maybe just that connection to each other and to the activity at least made us stay in it longer to be old and still doing it. I don't know. But
Well, you definitely had some great staff members that year for you guys that are still influencing the activity, and you know,
And I think a lot of people would point to that year as being a defining year for Bluecoats for the next several years, right? That there was something special about, and it was everything you pointed out, everything Taha told us about that experience, and a bunch of other things that all just coalesced. It all just came together, and created something that I don't even remember how competitively successful it was, but that year was impactful. You know,
memorable for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it is cool, right? Like I remember I talked to some people on the '08 line, right? Like Justin Lewis, Niles Abel every now and then. My buddy Mike Medeo marched there. I taught with a guy named Rick Wilkerson who was on bass there. Every time I talked to him, I'm like, '08, man, like that's the show, that's the line that made me want to do Bluecoats, right? Like, and again, I did the Rennick Phase 2 thing too, but like that's the line. Like, well, the first time I watched it, I was amazed. And I've had a few people say the same thing, about 2012. And I think that's special. And I think that's cool, right? And what Mike was able to do with the culture he created. Tom Rarick obviously writes an incredibly groovy book. I think it's gotten Blue Coats has just morphed so much. It's gotten a little bit more rhythmic and probably a little choppier. The book they play this year and years past is probably way harder than what we did in 12. But it was just so groovy, right? There was just something about it. And they gave us a great product, and luckily we had good leaders.
and interest, and also not just groovy, but interesting in the way that it was groovy. Like it's almost like especially on first exposure to his stuff, you're almost caught by surprise how good it feels. You're like, how is he doing that? It takes you a little bit to figure that out right away.
Yeah, I love hearing Tom. I love hearing Tom talk about his books. Like who just did one with him? Was it the Aged
Oh,
Out
the
guys?
aged out guys, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I love Tom Rare. I love his stuff. I love him as a judge. I love hearing him talk.
It's amazing. He writes every single part from pit to drum set to battery, everything, and it just the way it fits and flows is incredible.
There's something to be said about it just makes sense in his head, and to be able to then take that and actually bring it to life, right? You know, TJ, I wanted to ask you about, so you sort of mentioned very quickly that 2012 Mystique was really difficult, very physically probably challenging show, musically as well. I wanted to ask you about those years, like because we just talked about how great the experience was at Bluecoats in 2012, but it was your first year marching a full summer of drum corps, right? You talked about doing athletics and stuff like that, and maybe that really helped prepare you. But was anything particularly difficult about your first time playing in lines at that level, right, over that period of time, right, for as long as you had to, and all of that, either at Mystique or Coates? Anything particularly difficult about those experiences for you?
Yeah, I think at Mystique, there's in this. I really liked my experience at Mystique. I learned a lot of things. What I would say, the two things I learned most were rhythmic, like how to break things down and how to become a rhythmic expert, right? And then two, like mindset and focus. There is such an intensity at Mystique always. Like the standard almost doesn't even need to be talked about. It just fucking happens, right? And I don't know if that's still the case. Like when people walk in, they almost feel like this aura. I'm not sure.
Oh, we felt that.
Oh, 100%. We've been lucky enough to go to a couple rehearsals,
The first time we walked into a Mystique rehearsal, oh my goodness.
and the amount of just, I'm looking for the right word. Focus, I guess is the right word. The amount of focus from the members,
Yep.
and the staff, and it's incredible.
Yeah, no, it's intentionally designed that way, right? And it's so crazy because I've watched them rehearse, and obviously I've rehearsed there, and then I watched Pulse rehearse, and they're two completely different things, right? And then, even when we rehearse, I'm like, okay, I wish we could be, I'll never be Mystique. Like that's not my vibe, right? But can I take a little bit of that and just plop it with what we do and us be a little better? I think so, right? So going back to your question early on, what was difficult was I'm a guy that like in the rep, I am very focused, right? Like I am always in there. I'm never gonna fuck around during a rep, but I'm a pretty like casual guy otherwise, right? Like, and I can come across intense, I think, to members these days, but like still at my core, I like to tell jokes. I like to hang out. I like to chill. I use the term a lot where there's nothing chill about a rep, right? Like our culture feels chill. It feels calm. The way we communicate, with a few exceptions here and there, is very calm. Um, but there's nothing casual about a rep. When the Met goes on, there's nothing casual about it. But for me, like getting back to set, walking, all these things, I'm a little bit more leeway with that. At Mystique, I think the way, and this could be wrong, but it felt like that internally, the way we're really able to commit 110% for the rep is there's no off time, right? Like there's no time where you're chilling, right? Like after the rep, you're running back. On the water breaks, you get it and run back. 10 to like 15-second water breaks. And that's one thing I struggled with because I'm a guy who likes to shoot the shit every now and then and make jokes and play grab ass with the guy next to me, messing around with him, right? But then when the Mets on and they're calling instruction, then I turn into a robot. That was one thing I think I struggled with was the intensity of that. And there's a little bit of I don't want to say like imposter syndrome because I had supreme confidence in myself, but I did realize very quickly I was not the best guy there, right? Like at my last couple groups in open class and the bottom of world class, I was either the best or the second best guy, right? And that didn't slow me down. It didn't like make me, I guess, what's the word? Starts with a C. Here we go. Remember how I forgot the word cabinet all the time? I'm forgetting a very basic word here. I can't remember it. Either way, it made me. It didn't stop my drive, right? I still wanted to be the best. I still wanted to be better. At Mystique, I went there and I looked at people who had marched 5 years at Bluecoats and 4 years at Bluecoats and 3 years at Phantom Regiment and here. And I said, I know these guys are better than me. So there's a little bit of like nerves and there's a little bit of I can't let these people down, right? That you put on yourself. So I struggled with that early on of just like, okay, how can I be as good as these guys? Visually, I wasn't the best marcher, and I never ended up being the best marcher. But I was getting my ass kicked. There was a move Shane gave me early on. I didn't hit until March. He gave it to me in December, and I don't think I hit it until March. It was just so hard. It was like the second move of the show, and I never hit it.
I can sort of imagine, like when you just did that gesture with you, I can sort of picture that in the show. Like you were probably, your dot just made it so you had to, your step size was insane or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was nuts, right? So that took a lot of work. And I don't think I ever got great at marching. That's something I was never great at, but I got passable. I got like, you're not staring at that guy the whole time. Early on in Mystique, I was probably an eyesore, right? So those were things I struggled with, and I really had to spend a lot of time and fix it. I think I did eventually. But I mean, Mystique is there's no at the time, and it could still be the case, but there was no better place to learn how to focus and how to care like Mystique when I was there. So I credit a lot of like how I'm able to break things down and a lot of my rhythmic interpretation and a lot of my ability to be intense when I need to be from Mystique.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting that you brought up that thing about essentially like being able to flip the switch of you're either on, right, or you're off. That's actually something that you had mentioned about why Boston, like when you went to that audition cab at Boston, why that wasn't necessarily a great fit because you felt like I need off time. I need time for my brain to disengage from this. Um, is that because you need relief, right? Like does the off time help you be able to do the on time? Like, you know what I mean? Because it's not an all the time thing, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just think like the idea of always being 100% locked is silly, personally. Like I think you should be able to relax, calm down, talk like a normal human, enjoy yourself, and then get right back into it. Like I think in an ideal world, that should be what's possible. The issue is sometimes I think that's possible, and it's just not with the membership you have, right? So I've learned over the years at Quest, like I can't be as casual, I think, as I probably innately want to be, right? I gotta take 10% from what I learned at Mystique and put it in there. But do I feel like I need a break? No, I don't think it's anything more than just like I think it's inefficient, I guess, to just always be mentally right. Like, some people think it's badass that like the cadets sit next to each other, like stand next to each other like this and like walk to a bathroom like that. I always thought it was silly. I was like, why can't they just walk like normal humans and talk to each other and then use the bathroom and then come back? And then when the Met goes, then they turn into, badass robots again. That's just always been my thing, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I wanted to ask
Ooh,
you.
complacent. Complacent was the
There's the
word I
word,
wanted.
the C word.
There it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you, do you teach for a living or is that like just a secondary thing? What is your main gig?
Yeah, no, I don't. Atlanta Quest and then the DCI thing, which I've only done 3 years now, is my only thing. I tried to be a percussion instructor for a couple of years, right? I did it in college. After that, I taught a local high school, did a lot of band camps, and like I'd be flown out to do a little bit of stuff here and there across the US. But generally, if you're not like a full-time band director or you're a big-time designer, there's not a lot of money in it. And I learned that within 2 years. And I said, I'm 24 years old and I'm making $17,000 a year, right? And that's just not enough to live off of. So I became I had a marketing degree from UGA. Um, so I hopped into this thing called recruiting. So I'm a professional recruiter. I work for I've been doing it I guess 9 years, a couple different companies, but my current company is a company called Corn Ferry. It's a big publicly traded recruitment firm, right? So we do a bunch of different.
They're big in golf. They sponsor
Yeah, they sponsor.
the tour that's underneath the PGA Tour.
Correct, exactly. This is part of my spiel, actually. George, when I'm like, hey, people know us because of two things. Either they know us because we sponsor a golf tour, or they know us because we're the number one search firm in the world. So, what I do is I place accounting and finance people at corporations in the Southeast. So, say Home Depot, they're based in Atlanta. Say they need a director of finance, right, or a vice president of tax. Normally, they'd have their own internal HR talent acquisition team try to fill it. But should they not be able to, for whatever reason, they'll, engage a firm like mine to do it for them. So I work with, a bunch of different companies in Atlanta and help them find finance leadership effectively. So
So is that what you call what's the term, headhunter?
Headhunter, yeah. So I'm part sales, right? The hard part of my job is convincing companies to pay my firm tens of thousands of dollars to hire someone, right? So I'm the sales guy in that aspect. But once they say yes, I'm a headhunter. And then I'm just pounding the phones and sending emails trying to find people that can do the job.
Does that career field help you in recruiting, like members for your ensembles?
Yeah, it definitely desensitizes me to people saying no. Right? Like I have no problem messaging anyone at any time, and them telling me to piss off, right? Like that is in a sales job, if 5% of the people talk to me that day, like that's a win, right? So I'm used to incredible amounts of no's. So yeah, in terms of recruiting, right? Like Atlanta Quest, it took a while for us to kind of become a thing. But even now people know our name, I still actively recruit. I still have my staff reach out to kids. I look at who marches where in the summer, and I see a good kid in the lot in the winter, and I say, okay, Sparkman High School, like let's figure something out with them, right? But it helps. There's it just it makes you comfortable. It makes you comfortable with cold reach outs to people. It makes you confident when you talk to people in terms of how to sell without coming across salesy, right? I've learned in my job why people like working with me sometimes is because I talk like this. I never like button it up and like become an overly corporate sales, whatever monkey. I always talk like myself. So that's kind of what I do always. And I think that works with some people professionally. I probably lose clients because of it if they want someone a little more official sounding. But it helps recruit these kids too. So yeah, it helps a lot.
You're genuine. Just from speaking with you here and now, you could tell you're a very genuine person. Just, you wear it all on your sleeve, and we're going to get who TJ is just by talking with you.
I am not a great editor, Rob. That's one thing I've gotten better at over the years is editing myself at times. But yeah, generally, I'm not I'm not gonna say stuff unless I believe it.
I've definitely had to learn how to button it up because in my line of work that I did, I couldn't just be like telling people what I thought because then I'd probably get fired.
Sure.
But I was gonna ask something, but I lost my train of thought. Go ahead, George. If
That
you
happens.
got something. If you got something,
TJ, how did you know you wanted to be an instructor after marching? Did you know that early on? Did anybody tell you, hey, you would make a good instructor? Or were you just like, I did this thing, now I need to make a little bit of money. Let me go teach this school.
That's just what you do, right? Generally, in college, if you're decent at it, you teach a high school, you make a little bit of money. So, I was fortunate that the Ryan Bybee guy I mentioned earlier, he hired me at this school called Collins Hill, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I looked their age. I was like, so I'm when I was in college, I was always a year younger than my grade because I skipped a grade when I skipped second grade. So I was always a year younger. So I went in there as a sophomore and I was teaching seniors and I looked like a freshman. And I looked like a young freshman, right? So I didn't even look like a teacher yet. So it was tough. But I learned a lot. Ryan Bybee really he expected a lot in terms of planning and like being ready and having a plan for rehearsal because he was very regimented with every 20-30 minute block. So I took a lot from that first gig. But no, I never said like my dream is to be a teacher. I think I ended up pretty decent at it naturally. And even now, like there's stuff I taught in 14, 15, 16, 17, like exercises. I use pillars almost of how I taught then that I just threw away because they don't make sense anymore for how I approach things. So I'm constantly tweaking. But no, I don't know how I ended up here, but I'm glad I did. It's fun.
Was was there anything like when you perform at a high level and then you're like, okay, yeah, I'll teach, right? Or somebody gives you the opportunity. Um, I always love asking about that switch in perspective, right? Of things, you're making things happen inside the line, and you have this opinion of all the people sort of standing in front of you and how effective they're being and all of that. But then when you step outside the line, and now it's on you to fulfill that responsibility. Um, were there any sort of other than Ryan giving you like a very much like here's how we need to do things in terms of being planned out? Was there anything that was a big shock to you? Any huge lessons about those in those early years where you were like, wow, like I not necessarily not prepared, but this is actually surprising to me that I'm having to adopt this. Like this is actually having to factor into my thinking when I actually have to teach this stuff.
Yeah, I think I talk too much. I think everyone talks too much when they're young, right? Like and I got over this, I think, pretty quick. Like there's times where I got to give a diatribe and like I just got to explain all of it. I got to take 8 minutes and do it, right? I do that every now and then. But at the time, and even when you're young, I think you're trying to prove to the kids you know more than them, right? You almost want to substantiate your qualifications through just like how much can I say? So that's one thing I learned early, and one thing I was told is just like, let's just get reps, baby. Like, for every minute you talk, let's have like 5 minutes of just uninterrupted sound, drums, right? So that was one thing I had to curb, I think, pretty quickly was, and I think again, it was because I looked young and I was young and I was inexperienced and I wanted to make sure they knew I know what I'm talking about, right? So that's one thing I had to fix quickly. In terms of like coming up with a plan and things like that, I think that came naturally. I was always generally pretty diligent about things as a kid. So I think that just kind of came naturally in terms of, okay, I got an hour, let's plan. But I guess one thing I still suck at is how much can I actually do in an hour, right? Like you got a list of 5 things, you ain't hitting all 5. You're gonna hit 3, right? But I still make that mistake. So that was, I guess, one thing I struggled with early.
Just one thing before I forget. Number one, I skipped fourth grade, so that whole experience of like kind of being like the youngest person in your class all the time.
Everyone's driving, and you're just riding with mom everywhere.
Exactly. And the thing about talking a lot as a young instructor was actually Bricky told us that was one of his big lessons early on. So yeah, this it seems to be a common thing. Go ahead, Rob.
No, I just remembered what I was going to ask earlier. We were talking about Atlanta Quest earlier, and there's one thing I don't know if maybe you can discuss on this, but the base culture there. How did that start, and how do they keep maintaining that level of just absurd sound quality and playing that they do?
Yeah, it all started. Well, I would say the most important thing is Micah Hanner. So Micah is our battery coordinator slash like uh assistant ensemble coordinator. There's effectively 2 people that run ensemble, and it's me and it's him, right? And he's obviously a great bass drummer. He drummed at March Phantom Regiment a couple years in the early 2010s, but he's also a pretty good rudimental snare drummer too. So he really cares like just about being able to play drums, right? And then you just turn it sideways. So like there's the technical aspect of it, but there's something about Micah that like I can be motivational at times, but eventually I have a capacity where like I can't say this thing a different way, right? Like Micah has a skill where he is able to get anyone to believe in anything, and he'll say the same thing 80 different ways because he's so creative, right? Like the messaging doesn't get stale. So I think there's something just almost intangible about Micah's presence there, and how the expectations he has for them and how he empowers them too. Like a lot of the leaders, Ben Maton, who marched coats a couple or maybe 1 year, but he marched here forever. The DC marched here forever. Jason George, he was a blue coat for a couple years or something like that. He was here forever.
CJ.
CJ, yeah, exactly. He does a good job of empowering them, and that's one thing I struggle with sometimes is I can get a little micro. I can get a little like, here's I know it needs to get done, and I know it needs to get done this way, so I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it, right? And that's something I've been trying to do a lot this year is let's just step back and let's explain and let other people do it. Micah is great at empowering them, right? And hey, here's what we need. You guys want to write this? Here's the ideas I have. Do your thing, write the exercise, write the whatever, and they feel like they're part of it, right? It's not like Micah and then it's like Micah and they're right there with them, right? So there's some type of buy-in that they get uh, that is exquisite, right? And obviously, Alan Sears does a good job writing the book, and there are moments where he'll just write 30-second notes on, a line and say, go to town, do whatever you want. Right. And that's when, Micah and his crew will go in there. But I think from a technical standpoint, they're great players and Micah's a great teacher. I think this year was a little more rammy. Like I think this year's baseline, we just kind of rammed some stuff. But what I really like generally is we have space, we have touch. It's not just right. There's
It's not just shoes in a dryer.
correct. And the touch is always there, and that's something that's important to me across the entire group is like, how's our touch? How's the tone of the drum? How's it singing? I'm always fighting top bass on bottom bass. Don't be too loud, don't be too abrasive, right? I do very little with the bass line more than, call a few ticks and call a few balance things. But yeah, I would say we recruit good players, we train good players. A lot of the people that became pillars started at Q2 for a year, right? And kind of worked their way up. So there's great training there. But there's just something about Micah. Once he gets his hands on you, he's able to create some greatness.
Is it a different version of like when you were talking about Micah and how he was empowering, like in his own way he figures out how to get the members invested, right, and feeling a little not like you said, like Micah's up here and they're all down here. Is that similar to what you described how Tom was as a section leader, Tom Gasparini?
Yeah, very similar.
In their own ways, they figure out how to make people not feel not how to, how to make people not feel the hierarchy so much, right?
Yeah, and when you don't feel that, there's a little bit less nerves, and I think there's a little bit of risk there, right? Where maybe they get too comfortable, right? And they don't uphold, but he's the way they manage the culture. It's a way where like I'm part of this thing. I'm not going to be the one to let it down. Not because you're afraid, but because like you're an equal and you want to keep propelling everything upward, right? So it's impressive what they do, and we've had what. Luckily, we don't lose any kids from that section either, right? Like they I mean, I guess we lost to DC to go to Rhythm X one year after COVID, but the COVID thing kind of messed everything up, right? Um, but there's a culture of excellence. People want to be a part of it. People generally don't leave once they're there. Luckily, we got some of these kids young, right? We got the DC when he was 16. We got Ben Mate when he was 17, right? And when you're able to get those pillars, right, people want to come march with them, and they're there for 5 years. It helps. So luckily, we got 3 vets this year. So I'm excited to see what they do again. But
Yeah, at some point we need to have Micah on.
Yeah,
because he's
for
like
100% because he's just amazing.
I just wanted to say that when we came out and to the Atlanta regional, I filmed bass subs, and that was like the second time I would say that I got to see Micah at work, right? And what I loved about the way he ran bass subs was that every comment was about sound.
mm-hmm.
It was about and exactly like all the points that you emphasized, that the tone of the drum, the sound, balance, like all of those things. He was so just on top of that and knew, okay, this adjustment, and all of that. But to your early point earlier, like the night before, right, when you guys invited us to rehearsal, he was up there in the box, right, saying things, and he's really good at that too, right? I think the thing that is nice about, at least again from the outside, just from observing, Micah, like there's a balance between him empowering the students and him being able to just with his presence hold them accountable. Right. And it's not in a like, you messed up, how dare you kind of way. It's just it's very much like just from talking to him, you can tell that there's a standard to meet.
If every section could take the true standard, and I talk about it, but I don't get the buy-in he does, right? If we could get the absolute 100% buy-in across the entire ensemble that the basses do, just in terms of here's the standard, here's how we're gonna uphold it, here's the work we're gonna put in to do it, we'd be in a great spot. And that's, I mean, when he runs ensemble, I run ensemble when we need to play clean, when we need to play together, when we need to focus on the technical, the execution. He runs ensemble when we need just belief. When we need to really believe in what we're doing, we need to trust each other, we need to connect with the process and just buy in. Like he's the best guy I've ever seen for that. Not to say he can't call ticks and do the technical stuff too, but when we just need that little kick in the ass, he's going to deliver every time, and it's cool to watch.